Greetings and salutations, and thank you for clicking on the video. Today we're going to talk about Ubuntu 17.10 Artful Aardvark. This video is being recorded just hours away from the official release, and there's a lot to talk about in Ubuntu 17.10. It is the most exciting release of Ubuntu probably since Ubuntu 14.04, or maybe even Ubuntu 10.10, Maverick Meerkat before that, and I go back that far with Ubuntu. And there's so much to talk about, there's no way in the world I'm going to cover it all in this video. So in this video, I'm just going to hit the highlights. This is just going to be a very informal look around, a quick talk. We're going to talk about what's changed, what's different, why this is such an important release, what happened to get us here. And of course, I'll answer the question whether I think you ought to run Ubuntu 17.10 or not. First, we're taking a look at the current version of the release notes. And first thing to talk about is the fact that this is an interim release of Ubuntu, which means that it will only be supported for 9 months. In a lot of ways, you can think of this as just a beta test for Ubuntu 18.04, which is the long-term support release coming up in 6 months. And in Ubuntu land, we get a release every 6 months, and every 2 years, we get a long-term support release. So the current long-term support release is Ubuntu 16.04, and if you are using it, and if you are liking it, and everything's working the way you want it to, there is absolutely, positively no reason whatsoever to change to Ubuntu 17.10. However, if you are running Ubuntu 17.04, I strongly urge you to upgrade to Ubuntu 17.10, and the directions are here in the release notes. So do that, because Ubuntu 17.04 was a dumpster fire of an operating system. It had a lot of problems in it, and I think a lot of that was due to the fact that right about the time that Ubuntu 17.04 was released, there was a huge shakeup at Canonical, the company that distributes Ubuntu, and I think it reflected in the operating system itself. So you'll notice that I really haven't talked much about Ubuntu 17.04 on this channel because it really just had a lot of issues. Now, the amount of ground that Canonical has covered in the last 6 months since their reorganization and refocusing has been absolutely stunningly amazing. Ubuntu 17.10 is solid. It was solid in alpha. It was solid in beta. And I'm pretty convinced that it's going to be really good for the official release when that comes out very shortly here. Big changes. First of all, we're getting the GNOME desktop by default in standard Ubuntu. They have not shipped the GNOME desktop by default since Ubuntu 10.10. Ubuntu was shipping with the Unity desktop starting with Ubuntu 11.04 and going up to 17.04. And that is one of the projects that they decided to drop. Unity will still be supported in Ubuntu 16.04. So if you're running 16.04 and you're using Unity and you like it, don't worry about it. They're still supporting it. They're just not going to be developing it further. Unity is actually available for Ubuntu 17.10, and you can just install it by installing a package, and you can put it on your desktop and keep using it if you want to. But once you get a look at the new GNOME desktop, you might not actually feel that you had to do that. And we'll do that in just a few moments. Another big change here is the fact that Wayland is going to be default. Wayland is the new display server for Linux. Linux has been running the X display server for, well, since the day it came out. So X has been around actually since the 80s. And it's getting rather long in the tooth, and Wayland is going to be leaner and meaner and do a better job. Ubuntu 17.10 will try and install Wayland by default on your system if your hardware is compatible. If not, it will switch back to X. And you can also manually log into a session running on Xorg. Now, for those of you who are just standard desktop users, that probably is not something you're going to have to worry too much about. It's just that we are in the transition stage, and Wayland promises to be better. We will wait and see, but there's a long way to go with that. So other changes here that are worth talking about, we get GNOME 3.26.1, which is the very latest GNOME desktop. Ever since Ubuntu switched to Unity, we have had a flavor of Ubuntu called Ubuntu GNOME, which is independent from Canonical, but an official flavor that shipped the GNOME desktop. And I love Ubuntu GNOME and always did. The only downside to it was they usually shipped us an older version of GNOME for stability reasons. Now, since Ubuntu is going to be shipping with GNOME all the time, we're going to get the latest. So that is really awesome. And a lot of changes have been made, and a lot of things have been sent upstream to GNOME from Canonical now that they've turned their attention to it. So that's pretty cool. Let me see if there's anything else in here that's really, super been, worth talking about here. Ubuntu GNOME, that particular distribution, that's been discontinued. So if you're currently running Ubuntu GNOME, let's say you're running Ubuntu GNOME 17.04, when you upgrade, you're just going to go to straight Ubuntu. It will not be Ubuntu GNOME anymore. It'll just be Ubuntu. If you're running Ubuntu 17.04 with Unity, it will upgrade and you will get a GNOME desktop. If you're running Ubuntu 16.04 and you want to upgrade to Ubuntu 18.04 and you're running the Unity desktop, it will put you on the new GNOME desktop, and the same goes for Ubuntu GNOME 16.04. Now, any other flavor, you're going to have to upgrade within your flavor. So if you're running like the MATE desktop, then of course you'll want to upgrade to Ubuntu MATE or reinstall with something else if you want something different. And there's more here, but that's pretty much all I really wanted to talk about. I mean, we get the latest kernel, we got the latest GNOME. How cool is that? So let's jump over here and take a look at this. I have already covered this in the past videos when we were looking in alpha and beta, so this is the final look. So the first thing that you're going to notice is it looks a whole lot like Unity. It is not Unity. This is the GNOME desktop, but they have this wonderful new Ubuntu dock that they have put here. So this is a modification of dash to dock. And so it looks and acts a lot like the launcher in Unity. And so if you're familiar with how that works, you're not going to have any problems here. The difference is that this button up here right now, for me it's Google Chrome because I installed Chrome on this, but it's no longer the button for the dash. So the button for the dash is either by clicking activities, or you can come down here and click this, and this will take you directly to your programs. That is a standard GNOME thing going on. And so if you're familiar with the GNOME desktop, see, we can look at the programs that we've opened, and we look at all the programs that we have. And the animations don't work really well. This is running in a virtual machine for this video. I have installed Ubuntu GNOME on my hardware, or rather just Ubuntu, with the new GNOME desktop. When it was in beta, it worked fine. I didn't have any problems with it. I swapped it back to my Mint drives for other reasons. I'm not going to be running this full-time anyway. So for the video, yes, I'm doing it in a virtual machine, but I have done this on hardware, and it does work quite well, and I have no complaints. I only ran into one, and I'll tell you what that is in a little while here. First of all, this is pretty much the standard setup. You do get Thunderbird for a mail client. It is installed. We got the, just if you're used to Nautilus or files, that's what they call it in the menu. This is what you get. This is what it looks like. They have done a big update on the ambience theme here. They've changed a lot. And I think it actually looks really good for being Ubuntu. I mean, the look of ambience, no doubt, is dated, but there you go. You get the new software application. This is software from GNOME, and this is the Ubuntu spin of that. So you can use that to do install software, and all your favorite software tools are available for install. Like I prefer to use one called Synaptic, so that's available. You can also get GDebi, and you can install that. So as far as the guts are concerned, this really isn't that much different than Unity and the applications that you get. It's no big, huge change. We still have LibreOffice. We still have Firefox for the default browser. This is what the new settings look like. So they have kind of adapted what came with standard GNOME. We can just click down through here. Here's where you change your background. And we can do things to the dock here, like change the size, that sort of thing, make it auto-hide. And then down here is where we can work with printers. Now, if you are somebody who is working with a printer that you're going to put on a network, you may need to use a different application to handle that. You might have to log directly into CUPS, port 631 from your browser to make changes, or you might need to install or run a thing called, System Config Printer. So that's something you're going to have to look at, because I do know that the GNOME printer application, they just kind of skip all that. I guess they figure we don't need to do that anymore. But if you do, that's how you would take care of it. So kind of an interesting thing that happened here is if you come down to details, you'll notice this is where users is now. They still don't have any graphic way to get to groups we talked about in the last video. So you can install the old GNOME system tools with the package that has the package users and groups in it, and that way you can get to it, or you can do it from a command line, whatever you want to do. So there you go. That's what that looks like. Now, in order to do anything more with the desktop, you have to install GNOME Tweaks. This used to be called the GNOME Tweak tool. Now it's just called Tweaks. And you install it by installing GNOME Tweak tool. It does not come installed by default. You have to do it yourself if you want to get in and change things like fonts. And then, of course, here on the desktop, you'll see that it's supposed to be showing the home folder. Or at least it's... Oh, okay, they did fix that. Sorry, I was about to say something wrong, gang. For a while there, even though this would be turned on, it wouldn't show. That has been fixed in this release, so it's ready to go. I don't want to make sure I get that correct, because the last time I looked at this, it was already in beta, and that was an issue. But they have fixed so many bugs since then, it's unbelievable. And technically, what you're looking at here is the final beta. But there's not going to be that much that's going to change between now and tomorrow, so no big deal. Everything seems to be working. So this is where you can look at changing things within your desktop, and this is a tool you have to have. Like if you want to set your fonts, here's how you do it. And then if we come down here to, let's see, extensions, you'll notice we only got 2. That's because we are running in a default Ubuntu GNOME desktop setup. If you want to put GNOME extensions on this desktop, you are a GNOME user already and you know what they are and you know how they work, then you have to install the package GNOME extensions. And when you do that, you'll have access to all of the GNOME extensions. Also, if you want to have a standard GNOME desktop with none of the Ubuntu modifications, then you just install a package called GNOME Session. And then when you log out and log in, you'll have the opportunity to log into a generic GNOME desktop. But for a lot of Unity users, I think they're probably going to stick with this. And if you're not one who's into using a lot of extensions, you don't really know the GNOME desktop, you'll probably be totally all right, because all of the basics here are here, and it's well thought out and it's well chosen. Of course, there's more integration for snap packages. There is really a lot of stuff that's changed under the hood that makes this really awesome. First of all, they have done a lot of work on Bluetooth. So if you've had problems using Bluetooth devices with Ubuntu, and therefore probably everything else based on Ubuntu, and that's been a frustration for you, they've changed that. They've done a lot of work. Also, another thing that has changed with Ubuntu is that we are no longer getting a swap partition installed when you set it up. So if I do ls block here, you'll see that the only partition that I have is one big partition, and it's formatted ext4. What Ubuntu now does is it creates a swap file, which it sizes by looking at the amount of memory in your computer and how much memory you have, or space you have rather, on your hard drive. And then it figures that out, and it does it with a swap file and not a swap partition. There are several advantages to this. For the standard user who just does a straight install and you don't pay any attention to it, probably not that big a deal, but it's one of those little changes under the hood, and I happen to like it a great deal. I like that they have done that because it makes formatting disks and working with disks more simplified. Even if you should decide to do a custom install where you want to have a separate home partition, it no longer complains if you don't set swap. So it'll automatically figure that out and go, oh, you need a swap file here in your root partition, and it will create that for you. So it's very cool that way. I have HTOP installed. When this was installed, it decided that it needed a 759 megabyte swap file, and that's because this is a VM with only 2 gigs of memory assigned and that sort of thing. Memory consumption, quite good. We've opened a few things on the desktop compared to regular GNOME. GNOME usually consumes about a gig. This is usually about 750 megabytes as soon as it boots up, and I think that's probably because they have really minimized the extensions quite a bit with Ubuntu 17.10. So that is what it looks like. This is what it does. It is very awesome indeed. I have enjoyed playing with it. I had this running on hardware for quite some time. The only issue that I came across with it was, and it may have been fixed by now, was some choppiness in playing back YouTube videos. One of the things that they've worked on is video acceleration. They've done a lot with that. And so you may... it probably worked for you. It just, when I looked at it, it was brand new. So they've probably done something. That was the one thing that I saw, was just a little bit of choppiness in video playback. And so therefore, that's probably something that they're aware of and they're working on. A lot of bugs have been filed, a lot of community outreach. Canonical has done a just stellar job on getting this to work. This is a very functional desktop. And because it is GNOME, you can change a lot about it. You can do a lot with this. But if you're used to GNOME, it works, acts, and smells pretty much the same way. So if I'm going to go ahead and just log out here, and then you can look at the new GNOME Display Manager screen. And this is what it looks like. And down here is where you are going to have, well, I did have it, but I guess I don't. So here's where, if you install GNOME Session, which will give you the regular GNOME desktop, or if you want to install the Unity, it will appear down here. You'll get a little thing down here, a little gear-looking thing, and you can click it, and then you can choose which one you had. I have reinstalled this for this video, and I had forgotten because before I had installed GNOME Session to get a standard GNOME Session. But that's what it looks like, and it's very functional. And if you're already a fan of the GNOME desktop, you're good to go. Wanted to take a look also at Ubuntu MATE. Now, every time I talk about this distribution, this giant debate comes up about the pronunciation of MATE. I know that this looks like mate, ladies and gentlemen, and I also know that those of you who know where this comes from, which is yerba mate, which is a drink that is very, very popular in South America. Either way, it's being mispronounced. It looks like mate. The developers of the desktop call this MATE, the English-speaking developers, Martin Wimpress and Alan Pope, who actually administer this particular distribution. That's what they say. And that's what I call it. And that's the way it is. So you guys can have at it in the comments if you want to, but I refuse to get involved with that particular debate this time around. Now, there are some things that I can't show you here on the MATE desktop because there is a quirky little bug which has been around for a long time that if you're running this in a virtual machine and you happen to have NVIDIA drivers on your host, then this doesn't seem to work, which is the welcome screen. And that's a really important part of Ubuntu MATE. And if you'd actually install it on hardware and you'd look at it, it would work just fine, but I can't show you that. Another program that is very important is the Software Boutique. Now, the Software Boutique is one of the coolest things in Linux because it is a way for people who are not really super familiar with all of the software available in Linux to find out more about it. Unfortunately, guess what? I can't show you the Software Boutique either. Why? Because it doesn't render properly. And I'm not going to install this on hardware just to show it to you. So there it is. But trust me, it is really super cool. This is the standard MATE desktop layout, which actually looks like GNOME 2 from about 10 years ago. And it's intended to, because the original idea of Ubuntu MATE was to give you an Ubuntu with a GNOME 2 experience like we had before 2010. And that is the way it comes by default. But you do not have to live with this particular layout at all. As a matter of fact, if we come over here to look and feel, and then we go to MATE tweak, and we open this up, we can really have some fun and choose whatever desktop layout we want. And the one that I want to show, right now it's on traditional. The one that I'd like to show you first is called Mutiny. Go ahead and change, please. For those of you who are fans of the Unity desktop, well, look at this. It looks a lot like Unity, doesn't it? but it's actually much lighter weight than Unity. And let's see, if I click here, I don't get a dash, but I get this lovely new brisk menu, which is a really cool story behind this brisk menu, because this was actually written by Ike Dougherty, who is the head developer for another distribution of Linux called Solus, and the head developer for the Ubuntu MATE project, Martin Wimpress, was so impressed that he immediately ported it to Ubuntu MATE. So Ubuntu MATE is now available with 3 different menu choices, which is very cool. Also in here, the heads-up display works. You remember that from Ubuntu? So if I hit the alternate key, or the alternate key, it should pop up, but I'm not seeing it work right now. But maybe that's something you have to activate. I don't know. Well, let's open up an application that has a menu and see what happens, because it would definitely be something that would, the heads-up display was always very useful for LibreOffice. So we will wait for LibreOffice to launch. Yes, there's the heads-up display. Now, if I wanted to print something, I just start typing it, and you'll notice it figures it out where it is in all of these menus right here, all of this stuff. So that's what the heads-up display does. It's a very cool feature of Unity, and when I used Unity, I'd end up using it a lot. So that's something that you can get here in Ubuntu MATE. So it's a very Unity-like experience when it is set for Mutiny. Let me go ahead and close LibreOffice, please. Could I please close LibreOffice? I don't really want it open. I want it out of the way because I want to show you more stuff. So if you can also customize this, and then you can save it to whatever you want it to be. Now, if you are somebody who likes a more, let's say, Apple-like experience, then choose this one called Cupertino. Watch what happens. Get a little dock down there. That's actually a program called Plank, and it looks and acts a lot like Apple. We still get the brisk menu, which is really cool. Let's see. Let's try another one here. Let's try this one called Redmond. This tries to look a lot like the old Microsoft Start menu that you got in XP and Windows 7, and this is what it tries to do. So then you get the advanced MATE menu here, which is very cool. The Mint menu, which is one of my favorite menus. So yeah, it's a little bit heavier than brisk, but it offers some pretty cool features in there as well. And let's see, what else should we look at? Traditional, what do we got here? Contemporary, Cupertino, Mutiny. Let's look at Netbook. See what's different there. Netbook switches over to icons instead of... Here's where we can switch desktops. Okay, so it's slight changes. And of course, you can come up with your own. You can do whatever. That's the very simplified menu there. So we have a bunch of menus to choose from, which is really cool. So I'm going to switch this back to traditional. And there you go. Now, you can also choose your window manager here. Now, this is important. And if I was running this full-time, then I would definitely be choosing Compiz. Compiz is what the backend for Unity desktop was. And Compiz does some really groovy things. So if you have installed like XFCE, or maybe you have installed the Mint MATE version, and you had some screen tearing, if you can switch it to Compiz, a lot of times that helps that. It fixes it. And so it's available here in the MATE desktop as well for Ubuntu MATE. Ubuntu MATE is a very, very good distribution of Linux for somebody who is first starting out with Linux. And it is good for the kind of person who likes to explore and likes to play. Okay, that's the best way to put that, is that if you have somebody that you are going to start off on Linux and they just want it to work and they don't care, put them on Linux Mint. Put them on Linux Mint because everything's installed, everything's set up, and you get a basic install, and they won't have to do much because they get a browser, they get email, they get LibreOffice, all that stuff. Well, you get the same thing here over on Ubuntu MATE, but the setup is more interactive. It takes you through all kinds of different things when you're setting it up on the welcome screen, which unfortunately I can't show you. and it's a more interactive experience, and you tend to learn more about the distribution. So it depends on who it is that you're doing it for, but very cool indeed. Let's go back. And I think while I'm running this, I think I'm going to sport Mutiny for a while. What do you think? I think I made it mad as well. It probably still hasn't completely switched itself over to Compez. So there you go. Alright, gang. That is a quick look at these different Ubuntu flavors. We looked at mainline Ubuntu and we looked at Ubuntu MATE. There's a lot more here that I'm not talking about. I know that a great deal of work went into Ubuntu MATE. I know that a huge amount of work went into Ubuntu with the GNOME desktop, the new standard Ubuntu. And really, the very cool thing about all of this is that when 18.04 comes along, whatever bugs that they currently have going in 17.10, and I do know of a few, they're going to get that ironed out. And 18.04 is going to be a monster release with a lot of new technologies, a lot of old bugaboos taken care of. I mean, in this video, we've not even touched on snap packages. We haven't talked about that. That is growing by leaps and bounds. We haven't talked about a lot of the new technologies like live patching that's available in Ubuntu on your desktop, which means that you can install an update to your Linux kernel and not have to reboot. That's something that you can activate. So that's really cool. And I think that by the time 18.04 comes along, it's really going to turn the entire Linux world on its ear because they have done so much work and it has gone so far. So would I use this? Yes, I would use this. I tend to be very Linux Mint oriented. Most of the machines in my house are running Linux Mint, but on occasion I go crazy and I jump over and run Ubuntu. Do I recommend Ubuntu proper for a brand new Linux user? No, they will be lost. Ubuntu is just, there's like all these little packages that you need to install if you need to do this and you need to do that. For instance, like they don't ship GNOME Tweak. So a new user would not know that, why can't I change my fonts? Because you need to install this package, and that sort of thing. So it's more for people who are out of the novice stage and they're heading into intermediate and they understand all this stuff, and they're the kind of people that will read the release notes and they'll understand what it means and they'll know what packages to install. Now, Ubuntu MATE, on the other hand, that is a great place for people to start, especially people who are really curious and they want to learn Linux. It depends on the person. If you're setting up Linux for your mom, I still say Linux Mint, because sit her down in front of it, it's all there, and you can administer it for her. And my family loves Linux Mint. They love the Cinnamon desktop, so except for my son, who also loves Ubuntu. So when 18.04 comes along, I'm going to take a real hard look at it, and it might be that at least me and my son will be running 18.04. But all the girls basically love Linux Mint with the Cinnamon desktop, so that's where we're at with it. Hey, thanks for checking out the video, gang. I do appreciate it. And check out Ubuntu MATE. I'm going to put the link to Ubuntu MATE in the description for this video, and I'll put the link for ubuntu.com as well. It can be kind of hard to search this sometimes, and so that's going to be down there, and you can take a look at this distribution, something that if you are new to Linux, you might want to consider. If you've started out with Mint and you just want to play with something new, this is one to figure out, to go to. I like it a lot, and it's super easy to set up. At this point, I would still install 16.04 if you actually intended to use it. But if you have an extra machine, or if you use VirtualBox, throw 17.10 in it and play with it, because there's a lot going on here. Thank you for watching the video. Check out Easy Linux on Facebook. Check out Easy Linux on the web. Check out Easy Linux at freedompenguin.com, because a lot of really cool articles that I have written appear there as well, along with a lot of other very cool people have posted things there. Links to all of those sites will be in the description below. Thanks for watching.